Awesome. All right. I'm Paige. I'm an alcoholic, and hey, so good to be back. All right. So where we're going to be picking up today is page 113, second paragraph, if you have a number 3 husband. Now, as we're chit-chatting a little before the meeting, Wendy was like, I don't know what husband I have. What number is he? And so what I figured is while we take some time to find page 113, second paragraph, what I would do is a little bit of review. And I also wanted to say a special thank you to Gary and Cara, who did a wonderful job filling in for me. So what are we talking about? We're in the chapter called Two Wives. And this is a chapter that is meant to give directions on how someone who is as bound to the alcoholic as the alcoholic is bound to alcohol can navigate their the alcoholic that they have in their life. And we are given 4 different types of drinkers. Now I'm going to give us a very brief summary. Type number 1 might not even be an alcoholic. Type number 1 might be a bit of a heavy drinker, but here's kind of how you can tell who is type 1. They don't think they have a problem. They don't need any help. And really, it's kind of a level of willingness. So that's type number 1. Now, I guess a month ago, it's been a little while, but a while ago, what we did was we spoke about what are the directions. How do we help somebody who is type number 1? So how do we help somebody who maybe doesn't have a problem, but is definitely not thinking they do, and is open to no solution? And we were given what I like to call the 6 principles of success. So the first principle of success, I'm just going to run through it a little quickly. The first one is that you should never be angry. And the reason is that anger doesn't work. It doesn't help. It doesn't get us to where we need to go. And I know you lovely people have never had anyone mad at you. Because why? Why would they? You're all a delight. But I've had people mad at me. That's for sure. And anger didn't produce change. And we bounced around and we spoke about that idea that anger is helpful to no one, but it is fatal to an alcoholic. So we got to be free of anger. So it's not saying just pretend you don't have anger. It is pointing to the course of action that we take to get free of anger. So to write inventory, to share it with somebody, to take that quiet hour, to make amends, that process. The second principle of success is don't tell them what to do. It's not like they're going to listen anyways. See, here's the thing. If I am so desperate and concerned about somebody I love and they're drinking, if they were listening to me, I wouldn't have picked up a book called Alcoholics Anonymous and be reading it. So it does not work. Now, the third principle of success is to maintain those healthy relationships outside of your primary relationship. So maintain connections outside of, you and the alcoholic. Welcome. It's not a ladies' meeting. You are welcome here. And don't you worry. And we're just on page 113, second paragraph, and I'm doing a little bit of review. So it's a perfect time to come. So the fourth principle of success is to let go of the outcome. Because we might not be able to get this person sober. We might not be able to fix them. We might not be able to change them. Now, the fifth principle of success is to give them the dignity of their own experience. We're going to give them the information, but we're going to let them make their own decisions. Spoilers, they're making their own decisions anyways, whether I'm letting them or not. Now, the sixth principle of success, it talks about, meanwhile, go help somebody else. And so the sixth principle of success is to work the program myself and carry the message to those who are suffering. So a brief summary. Type 1, it's no willingness, does not think they have a problem, might not even be an alcoholic. And so what do? I apply the 6 principles of success. Now, who is type 2? Type 2 has some signs, maybe some earmarks of what it means to be an alcoholic. They're showing a lack of control when they drink. So the physical allergy, once I start, I cannot stop. They are also showing signs of the mental obsession. They're not able to stay sober when they want to. And so there's a sign that they want to. So that that points to somebody who has some signs of alcoholism, because that's alcoholism. Lack of control when I drink, lack of choice. And so lack of choice, which is I can't stay sober when I want to. So that is alcoholism. And then what do? Well, it says the same principles should be applied. Oh man, I can't throw out those 6 principles of success. No, I got to continue to utilize them. But it says, wait until he's, at the end of his spree. Wait until he's gone on a bit of a bender. And then just ask him, ask him, do you want to get sober? Do you want to quit drinking? And if yes, show the alcoholic your copy of this book. So it's asking, are you open to a solution? It says, don't push, don't prod, don't nag. Why? Well, I was pushed, I was prodded, I was nagged. I don't respond well to that. There's something in my brain, you tell me what to do, I'm going to do the opposite. I'm sure I shared with you my example of when somebody said, Paige, you have to write a gratitude list. Well, I didn't. And that showed him I was miserable. That's how my brain works. I know you guys are way more well-rounded and spiritual than that, but that's how I am. So it does not work. And so when we pick up on 113, second paragraph, if you have a number 3 husband. So who is number 3? Well, number 3 has the same symptoms as number 2, which is to say the allergy, so they can't control it when they're starting to drink, and they can't stay sober when they want to stay sober, but they've gone much farther. So they've had more consequences that are piling up. And the consequences don't make us alcoholic, but if you're like me, the consequences help me to see the reality of my predicament, which is to say the consequences help me to see that I can't do this on my own, that I can't drink, but I also can't stay sober. And so that's what the consequences do. So for type 3, and honestly, I think the 4 types of drinkers are exceptionally helpful. In fact, when we look at the 5 types of alcoholics in the doctor's opinion, a lot of times we have trouble seeing ourselves. We got to break down what does this mean in modern language. But I've never had anyone struggle with figuring out which they were on the 4 types of drinkers. And most of them are type 3, many type 4. We're able to peg ourselves, see ourselves in that list. And so this is type 3. So if you have a number 3 husband, you may be in luck. Good news. By the way, I will point out that's kind of not how any other medical condition would work. You don't want like type 3, type 4. You don't want going up the types. What you want is a 1 type 2. You want mild. But you'll notice if we remember, we didn't see any, you may be in luck. In fact, type 1, they're often difficult to deal with. You may be in luck if you have type 3. It is good news, and the reason is because when I am desperate, that's when I'm open. When I've come to the end of myself, that's when I'm willing. We spoke as we went through this book, the transition from hopelessness to hope, and that's what we're seeing here. So it says, being certain he wants to stop, you can go to him with this volume as joyfully as though you had struck oil. And I always think like in those 1940s sort of like plot lines when they're digging in the backyard and they find oil and it's like, we're rich. It's like we won the lotto. And that's it, man. If you're here today and you're like, girl, what? But that's what it's like. And for those of us who are enthusiastic about this thing, it is a little like, man, I was somebody who was doomed to die an alcoholic death. And I'm not only am I sober, but I have moments where I'm happy and I'm free and I'm full of joy. Man, it's like I struck oil. Like it is like winning the lottery. And so you'll notice that because the alcoholic might be open or might be willing for a solution, that's where, that's where it's like you can be just jazzercised about this thing because they might be open to it. And you'll notice you don't have to be as manipulative as you had to be for number 1 and number 2. Number 1, it's like, oh, I don't think you're an alcoholic. I mean, I am reading this book titled Alcoholics Anonymous because I think you have a problem, but I don't think you're an alcoholic. But why don't you read this book to help our alcoholic friends? It's just good information to have. Whereas type 2, you're picking the moment and you're waiting for the right moment. Where number 3, it's like, hey, we got a book. We got an answer. We got a solution. We can be transparent with it, which I love. And if, by the way, if we're here and be like, oh, people manipulating alcoholics? How could they? Well, we've been doing it to them for years, so fair play, you know? All right, so being certain he wants to stop, you can go to him with his volume as joyfully as though you had struck oil. And I love this. He may not share your enthusiasm. There's a lot of times I work with my sponsees and I'm like, oh, wonderful, let's write inventory. Or yes, we can amend that. And it's wild how they don't seem to share my enthusiasm for this program of action in the same way. And it says, he may not share your enthusiasm, but he is practically sure to read the book. And he may go for the program at once because he had been trying all these different ways to get sober and they had not been working. So there is an openness. And it says, if he doesn't go for the program, and I will point something out, there is a difference between reading the book and following the directions in the book. Just like there's a difference between going to meetings and talking about the steps and actually taking the actions of the steps. And as we know, I think there's incredible value in reading the book, but I've got to then apply it to my life. I mean, I do like four to five big book studies a week, so clearly I'm fond of reading this thing. So it says, he may not share your enthusiasm, but you are practically just sure to see him. He is practically sure to read this book, and he may go for the program at once. If he does not, you will probably not have long to wait. Again, you should not crowd him. Let him decide for himself. So again, this idea of I can't be forced into it. I can't be made to do it, which does not say we can't set boundaries. If I'm a family member or a loved one of somebody who is struggling with this illness, I can set boundaries, but boundaries are about my behavior. So if you're going to be drinking, I'm not going to be involved, you know? What it's saying is don't try to control their behavior because it doesn't work. We're up against an illness over which no human power is sufficient. And then it says, cheerfully see him through more sprees. Now, this is a line that, yeah, I see the faces. It's like, yikes. Girl. And so I want to pause and I want to spend some time with this line, which I know because it's our normal instinct as we read a line that's like, cheerfully see him through more sprees. Okay, Bill, I know what you're up to. But whenever there's a line like this, I want to stop and I want to break it down and I want to have an experience with it. And actually, I think there's a lot of value in that in general when there's something that I hear, something that makes me go, yikes, or gets my hackles up, that creates this resistance in me. There can be a lot of value in just sitting in that discomfort and exploring where there might be truth in it. Exploring with curiosity rather than judgment, which is also helpful when you're working with sponsees. That's just my experience. So when it says cheerfully see him through more sprees, let's talk about this. If he is an alcoholic and if he is type 3, there's no bones about it. He is an alcoholic, or this person is an alcoholic. There will be more sprees. There will be more sprees. It's not a matter of if they drink again. It is a matter of when they drink again. It is inevitable. And so there will be more sprees. Now, when we talk about cheerfully see him through more sprees, it's like, girl, I am not putting on that like little Miss Housemaker sort of thing. Absolutely not. But here's the thing. I speak about how this chapter is not really to wives. This chapter is to those who are as bound to the alcoholic as the alcoholic is bound to alcohol. There will be more sprees, and that person will not leave because if they had the ability to leave, they would. If I had the ability to stay sober on my own power, I would. And so when it's saying cheerfully see him through more sprees, there will be more sprees. We're sitting through it. And why would I do it with cheer? Because we're approaching it through the lens that those repeated failures, those I can do it my way. I don't need the directions in the book. I got this thing. And then relapse will convince the alcoholic that they can't do it their way. I remember last time we were talking about when somebody doesn't want to do the 12 steps, I'm not going to convince them. That's not my ability. That's not my job. I don't have that power, man. And I think I'm persuasive. I'm not that persuasive. I don't have that power. It is alcoholism that has that power. Alcoholism will take the alcoholic and beat the alcoholic into a state of willingness because it has dragged me to the end of myself, dragged me into the end of my abilities, my plans, my designs, my good ideas, my yeah buts, I still got, you don't know me, all of those. And it tears all of those from me. And I'm laid bare with me and my illness. And I can see the truth. And so when it says cheerfully see him through more sprees, it is because those sprees will do the convincing for the alcoholic to pick up this book and to follow this program. That is the context. And there's a little bit more value in it than yikes, don't tell her to put on a little housemaid's outfit and do the dishes, No, but if I sit with it, I see where there can be value in it. So it says talk about his condition, or this book only when he raises the issue. So again, we're not trying to force it. We're not trying to push it and keep in mind, page 18, when it comes to our family, we have our hackles up more than anyone else. I'm more defensive about my drinking with my family, with my loved ones than I am anyone else. Man, they can't tell me nothing and they're the ones I'm hurting the most. So it goes on to say, again, you should not crowd him. Let him decide for himself. Cheerfully see him through more sprees. Let him, or talk about his condition or this book only when he raises the issue. In some cases, it may be better to let someone outside the family present this book. They can urge action without arousing hostility. If your husband is otherwise a normal individual, your chances are good at this stage. Which I don't think I've ever been labeled as a normal individual, but when it talks about, in some cases, it may be better to let someone outside the family present this book. They can urge action without arousing suspicion or hostility. Make a little note to see page 91. And before we pop over to page 91, imagine two scenarios. Imagine you have been resentful, and I know this is going to be a stretch, but imagine that you have been resentful all day, and somebody has just, actually, I know this is a saying in the South, somebody has been eating your lunch. Somebody's been eating your lunch all day. Now imagine your spouse, husband, partner, whoever tells you to write inventory on it. How's that gonna go, ladies? Now imagine you call up your sponsor, same situation, same problem. Your sponsor is like, all right, let's write some inventory on it. We're a little bit more open to that sort of situation, but let's pop over to page 91. And what we're gonna do is 91 first full paragraph. And the reason, and I'll just explain why we're doing this. So it'll give us some time to find page 91, first full paragraph. But the reason we're talking about this is because a lot of times I think we have the idea that the forgotten chapters, as they're known, are not really important or added on or not really or different ideas. But what I want to point out is they are the same ideas that we have been seeing throughout the book continued on. So on page 91, first full paragraph, usually the family should not try to tell your story. When possible, avoid meeting a man through his family. Approach through a doctor or an institution is a better bet. So that idea that when it's family, there's just something about us where we're not open. but somebody who's been there, or a medical professional. Somebody might be able to share this information in a way that the alcoholic is more open. So let's go back to page 113. And again, your chances are good at this stage. I'll just talk about that, and that'll give us a chance to get to 113, bottom paragraph. This is the first time that we say, hey, things are looking up. Again, I want to emphasize, when it comes to alcoholism, the more hopeless, the better. The more that I'm able to see that I don't have an option, that I don't got a solution, the more likely I am to recover. I'm sure we all know what it's like to sponsor people, and they're like, I got a plan. Let me tell you my plan. It's like, oh no, and don't lend them any money. You're not going to see that. And like, but if you're like me, you know what it's like when you sit down with a sponsee and they've got tears in their eyes and their heart is broken and they're like, I don't know what to do anymore. And it's like, yeah, we can work with that. We can work with that. Now, let me tell you what I need to do. We're in trouble with those ones. So let's go to 113, bottom paragraph. You would suppose that men in the fourth classification would be quite hopeless, but that is not so. And so the fourth classification, those are, again, symptoms. They have the allergy, they have the obsession. They've gone to institutions, they've gone to jails, they've gone to detoxes, rehabs, sober living. In the book it talks about they've been locked up in an asylum. Throw away the key, that sort of situation. And it's saying you would see somebody who has this level of alcoholism and you would expect them to be quite hopeless. But that is not so. And what have we been focusing on as we've been going through this book? It is the hopelessness that leads to the hope. When I come to the end of myself, I can grab a hold of the hope. And again, this is counterintuitive. I would like a mild cold rather than a severe cold. I was kind of hoping I had some mild alcoholism, like baby alcoholism, and I could do a little bit of diet AA light. I wouldn't have to do the whole fledged thing, but turns out I got a whole case of this, full case of it. And it says many of Alcoholics Anonymous were like that. Many of us relate to what it is like to be in that fourth classification. There is no hope. And it says everybody had given them up. Defeat seemed certain, yet often, such men had spectacular and powerful recoveries. Now, I just want to point out, because if you're here today and you're like, man, I need that. I need a powerful recovery. I need something that is spectacular because I don't know how I'm going to get through another day. What I want to point out is how we get there. Because how do we get a recovery? How do I become recovered? How do I get a spiritual awakening, which is the solution in Alcoholics Anonymous? And it is the purpose of the 12 steps as outlined in this book. That is the purpose, to take us from that place of hopelessness to hope. To that place where we, each and every one of us, if we have not had, that we can have a spectacular and powerful recovery. And I say that regardless of how long we may or may not have been sober. Page 114. It says there are some exceptions. And I will just pause and say, that's not you. You are not an exception. Because if you're like me, you're like, I'm the exception. We read how it works and it's like, I have grave emotional and mental disorders. I can't do it. No, you are not. And that's a hill I'm dying on. You are not the exception. It says some men have been so impaired by alcohol, they cannot stop. That's not you. If you're here today and you managed to show up on time on the Zoom code, you're not, you did it. Good for you. That's not you. Sometimes there are cases where alcoholism is complicated by other disorders. A good doctor or psychiatrist can tell you whether these complications are serious. So my job isn't to diagnose. And here's the thing. If I'm here today and it's like, Paige, you don't understand, despite how adamant you are that I'm not the exception, I am convinced I am the exception. Or if you're here and you're like, you don't understand, my situation is complicated by other disorders. I mean, me too. Clearly, like that, if there's nothing else that's been apparent, that is glaring. And you're like, you don't understand. And here's what I want to point out. The direction for those that are so badly impaired, we don't even think it'll help. Like our friend Fitzmayo. If you remember, he was the second gentleman in the doctor's opinion. And they were like, man, he seemed to be a case of pathological mental deterioration. Like the only hope we had was this, and we didn't even think this was going to help Fitz. And he had a powerful spiritual awakening, which we saw at the end of the chapter, We Agnostics. Who are you to say there is no God? That was Fitzmayo. So it says, if you're here today and you're thinking, I'm type 4, I'm hopeless, I have outside issues, nothing could help me. It says, in any event, regardless of the external situations, regardless of what's going on, try to have your husband read this book. Try to offer this solution, regardless of what is going on. Offer this solution. That doesn't say we don't get outside help if we don't need it, or if we need it. That doesn't say we don't do those other things, but offer this solution. It says his reaction may be one of enthusiasm. And you guys know I'm big on enthusiasm. Or at least I've been told I am. And I love the word enthusiasm. Its etymological origins, because I'm fun at parties, the etymological origin of the word enthusiasm. The first part of it, or the meaning of it, is to be filled with God's Spirit. And so it's kind of that thing when people are like, girl, tone it down. I don't think we want me to tone it down. If I were to tone it down, it gets a little like suicide-y up in here. You know, it gets a little not so great, a little drinky. I am filled with a spirit that is not my own. And that's what enthusiasm is. And it's like, here's my experience. If you're like, where's God? God's wherever we're looking. Even if I'm not looking, that's where God is. But one of the greatest places to see God is where there's joy. You know, when there's joy, I can see that presence of God. God's there if I'm not experiencing joy. But so that enthusiasm. And it says if he is already committed to an institution. Now, keep in mind, in this day and age, people with our diagnosis, which is alcoholism, and people with our prognosis. So the diagnosis is alcoholism, and the prognosis. Now the prognosis has not changed. It is a progressive, incurable, and fatal illness. That is the prognosis. I will drink again and I will die. At that time, people with that diagnosis, which comes with that prognosis, would be locked, if they didn't have money, would be locked away in an institution. We weren't getting out. And so it's saying, if he's already committed, not getting out, but can convince you and your doctor that you mean business, give him a chance to try our method. Unless the doctor thinks his mental condition too abnormal or dangerous. So again, we're saying, hey, we're not doctors, we're not experts. But that idea of at least give them the chance to try it. So if you're here today and you're thinking, man, I've got this, I can't help me, you don't understand, I'm different, I've got all this pain and all this suffering, at least try this. I'm not saying don't get outside help, but try this regardless of what is going on. And I want to be clear, when I say try this, I mean try this. I don't mean try some of it. I don't mean try it for a little bit. I don't mean trying to do the AA Light, the aspartame flavored Coke Zero version or Diet Coke version. I mean all of it. Do this with everything that you've got imperfectly, but do this and see what happens. Because my experience is I'm not somebody who ever thought I could get well. And I got well despite myself. That's how this thing works, by the way. If you're like, I'm not super excited to do it anyways. I'm afraid to do it. Wonderful. Do it anyways. I don't think it'll help. Fantastic. Do it anyways. So much of my sponsorship is saying, that's okay. Let's do it anyways. So it says, we make this recommendation with some confidence. So we're not saying we're smarter than doctors, but we're saying we make this recommendation of whatever you are coming to, the andas, the yeah buts, the pain, the suffering, the severity of your alcoholism, give this thing a full try. And we give this with some confidence. For years, we've been working with alcoholics committed to institutions. When this book was first published, AA has released thousands of alcoholics from asylums and hospitals of every kind. The majority have never returned. And the takeaway from this recommendation is not based on what we think or what we believe or what we would like to have happened. This recommendation is based off the experience of what happened when we as recovered alcoholics carried this message to alcoholics who were locked away, who had no hope of ever getting out. I don't think lobotomies would be popularized for another 10, 20 years at least. But people that legitimately would be lobotomized. That's what was happening. Not right in the 1930s. I think it was the 60s it got popular. So that's what was happening for people like us. People whose only hope was an ice pick lobotomy. And the lived experience was that we were getting well. That we were coming out of asylums. And not only were we getting well, we were resuming vital, life-giving places in the lives of our families, our communities, helping others. That's what we're talking about. So if you're here today and you're like, I don't know if this thing could help me, I want to refer you to the very next sentence. The power of God goes deep, and that is a promise. So if you're like, Paige, you don't know how far down I've gone, the power of God goes deeper. You don't know how broken I am, the power of God is stronger. You don't know what I've been through, the power of God is more than that. The power of God goes deep. And that is not a theory. That is not an opinion. That is not just what I'm reading out of this book. That is our lived experience. This book is a textbook that is based on the experience of the first 180 members of Alcoholics Anonymous. It is experiential. The power of God goes deep. And it goes on to say, you may have the reverse situation on your hands. Perhaps you have a husband who is at large, and my brain's immediately thinking about the joke about the psychic with dwarfism that was committing crimes. You have a small, medium, at large. Just my brain, just not helpful. I couldn't, my brain was at large. Perhaps you have a husband who is at large, so out and about, but who should be committed. Some men cannot or will not get over alcoholism. When they become too dangerous, we think the kind thing to do is to lock them up. But of course, a good doctor should always be consulted. And I want to point out, that is the horror of this illness. That was the best that they had. And let's be real, they don't have much different today. Instead of being locked up indefinitely, it tends to be locked up in and out of rehabs, in and out of hospitals, in and out of psych wards, in and out of jails. So we're still locked up in institutions, but we get a little breather here and then to get us back in, That is the reality of this illness. And it says the wives and children of such men suffer horribly, but not more than the men themselves. And I'll be honest, I always struggled with that line. Because in my mind, I'm like, what I had as an alcoholic? I had relief, even if it was only a second of relief that barely lasted. I would get relief from the bottle. But the wives and family, they didn't have that same outlet that I had. But if we look back at what alcoholism does to the alcoholic, I don't know anyone who has died of alcoholism who has died a good death. I don't know anyone who has died of alcoholism that has not been fueled by pain, physical, emotional, spiritual pain and suffering and no relief in sight. And so it says, but sometimes you must start life anew. Wait a minute, I thought this book was just suck it up and put up with your crummy alcoholic husband. I thought that's what this chapter was. No, it's not saying put up with it. It's saying, hey, we're going to meet you where you're at. Because if you're reading this chapter, you're somebody who is unable to leave. And just as the alcoholic went through the cycle of alcoholism, the family member, the loved one, the friend, the partner, the husband, the wife, the spouse is going through that same cycle where they swear off, I'm never going to do it again, only to say, I'm going to take him back. This time will be different. To go through that same cycle. And it's saying, you must, but sometimes you must start life anew. Sometimes you have to leave. It says, we know women who have done it. Now keep in mind, this chapter is addressed to those who are as addicted to alcohol as the alcohol, or as addicted to the alcoholic as the alcoholic is addicted to alcohol. Well, I can't just stay sober. So how do they leave? Because we know any loved one of an alcoholic has had people for years that are like, leave him, leave her, don't put up with it, set boundaries, no. And they're like, okay, and then can't do it, yes. So how? It says, and this is the how. If such women adopt a spiritual way of life, their road will be smoother. How can I let go? The same 12 steps that are outlined in this book. Now make a little note to see page 97. We'll pop over there. But before we pop, or as we're popping over there, page 97, it'll be the bottom paragraph. I just want to share with you my experience. I've worked with, it's more commonly that I'll work with sponsees who are in just really unhealthy relationships, and it's not one of those where it's a surprise that it's unhealthy and it's toxic and it's codependent or it's abusive or you know what I mean? There's no surprise. And I've worked with people where they've had other people in their lives tell them, you got to break up with them, you got to leave them, you got to leave them. And they know, but the needed power wasn't there. There was no power and you got to leave him. How do I leave that which is giving me a sense of relief? And so what I've found to be more helpful is instead of focusing on that, focusing on building that relationship with a power greater than ourselves, focusing on building a relationship with God. How do I do that? The 12 steps is outlined in this book. And I have an example. I was working with somebody who could not make it a week sober. She absolutely could not make it a week. And she had been in and out like for 18 months. And I had seen her in and out, in and out, in and out. And she was actually sponsored by a friend of mine. And then she came and she asked me for help. And, she had this person. It was like every Monday would go and they would do all that they were going to do together. And that would be the relapse. And she'd been told again and again, you need to end this relationship. This isn't going to work if you end the relationship. And we were speaking about it. Like, we both know, but she's not able to. So what did we do? We did this work. We did this work as outlined in this book. And what happened? Not only was she able to build momentum and stay sober, she was able to leave him. And that's been my experiences. And I know this will be a surprise for you guys, that I might have ended up in an unhealthy relation. I just thought the red flags were flags, Red flags just look like flags. We got those rose-colored glasses on. Oh, Mr. Right, maybe not Mr. Right, maybe Mr. Right now, or in my case, Mr. Right out of jail. That happened a couple times. Oh, yeah, he was a catch. Little did I know, it was like a catch. When you get those seeds that'll like stick to you? It was like one of those. It was a catch and I couldn't get it off. Ugh. And I knew I needed to be done. And we'd broken up off and on. And I'd try to get sober and I'd try to get him sober, which that was effective, like nothing worse than somebody who's like, just white knuckling it herself. I'm like, I'm going to white knuckle for the both of us. Whee! What a delightful situation for everybody to be in. And what happened? How did I get free? I began to do this work. And I was able to not pick back up or pick him back up. So bottom full paragraph, page 97. Though an alcoholic does not respond, there is no reason why you should neglect his family. You should continue to be friendly to them. The family should be offered your way of life. Again, the way of life is these 12 steps. Should they accept and practice spiritual principles? The spiritual principles are the 12 steps. There is a much better chance the head of the family will recover. And even though he continues to drink, the family will find life more bearable. So again, that idea that I need to work the steps myself, regardless of who I am in the scenario, is not a new idea. It was an idea that was presented to us far earlier in the book, and we're seeing it come up again and again. So, back to page 114. So, the paragraph we left off, but sometimes you must start life anew. We know women who have done it. If such women adopt a spiritual way of life, the road will be smoother. And now at the very bottom paragraph of page 114, what we're going to do is we're going to transition. And we're transitioning to a part of the book, which is, how do I handle what people think of me? And in this case, how do I handle what people think of the alcoholic in my life, right? And I know nobody here ever worries about what people think. You know, that's not a you guys thing. You're just free from that. But I know I've fallen into that a time or two, you know, and because I'm worried about what I think they're thinking about me, but they're not. But I'm still wrapped up in it as if I was that important. I'm not. So it says, if your husband is a drinker, you probably worry over what other people are thinking, and you hate to meet your friends. You draw more and more into yourself, and you think everyone is talking about conditions at your home. Now, when we talk about the bondage of self, sometimes I think we have the lens that the bondage of self is sort of that, I am so wonderful, and it is my sash of awesome, and here I am. No, the bondage of self, to be wrapped up in self, is this. This is what it looks like. I think everyone's talking about me. I think everyone's fixated on me and my problems. I'm wrapped up in me. It is me on me, like bone on bone, and I don't got any freedom. So you draw more into yourself, and you think everyone is talking about conditions in your home. You avoid the subject of drinking, even with your own parents. You do not know what to tell the children. When your husband is bad, you become a trembling recluse, wishing the telephone had never been invented. And again, there's different lenses that we can put on this. One, that is what the bondage of self looks like. I'm wrapped up in self, and that is what I need freedom from. The second way in which I can look at it is, that is how I affect others. One of the biggest lies so many of us tell when we come to Alcoholics Anonymous is, I was the only one that I hurt. But if you ask, who was trembling when I was bad? Trembling, and when you think of trembling, that's a visceral physical reaction. The body is shaking. The nervous system is shot because of fear. That is how I affect those who love me. I lead them to feel shame and embarrassment and fear. And so we got to get freedom. It says, well, we find that most of this embarrassment is unnecessary. While you need not discuss your husband at length, you can quietly let your friends know the nature of his illness. But you must be on guard not to embarrass or harm your husband. And what we're beginning to see is this idea that if I keep something a secret, it grows. You know that thing? And it's a thing. Well, I should put a little thang on it, like it's got a twang, because it like reverberates in your inside. That thing that I don't want to tell people. That thing that is eating me alive. That thing that I didn't want to share in my fifth step. That thing. And when I hold on to that, it grows and grows and becomes louder and bigger and overwhelming, and you don't understand. And it is like this darkness that encompasses all the light and all the joy in my life. And then we share about it in a fifth step. And what immediately happens? It dissipates. I share that thing, and the sponsor, whoever's receiving, is like, oh, me too. Actually, if you're sharing your fifth step with me, I'm like, oh yeah, I did that last Tuesday. Oh, absolutely. It's like, yeah, who done, right? And it immediately takes away that power. And so it's that same idea that we don't want to embarrass anyone. We don't want to share stories. But there's power in saying, yeah, that person is an alcoholic and they're not able to stop drinking. It's a serious illness, and that's what's going on. And how often in my life that ability to just be transparent dissipates all the internal anxiety that I have created in my life, whether it's about alcoholism or not. How often my brain builds things up, but if I just communicate, I get freedom from it. By the way, I do need a program of action in a book, the spirit of the universe, the power of God to work in my life to be like, oh, actually, I'm not available next Tuesday. You know what I mean? Like, just basic communication. Like, it's wild how much that's not intuitive for somebody like me. I know you guys can't relate. So it says, when you have carefully explained to such people that he is a sick person, you will have created a new atmosphere. And that's what we're talking about. Barriers which have sprung up between you and your friends will disappear in the growth of sympathetic understanding. And what we're talking about, if this mirrors something we would have read back on page 73. So let's pop over to page 73. I have a feeling we weren't doing a whole lot of bouncing around with Gary and Cara. They're both on it and linear and professional, but I shall bounce around. Woo! So let's bounce. So 73. And it's talking about the second or the first full paragraph, more than most people. The alcoholic leads a double life. And we can see that is mirrored in the Al-Anon. Everything's fine. If you've ever had a peacemaker, or not peacemaker, peacekeeper in the home, somebody that's like, it's fine. No, don't worry about it. It's just fine. Just a peace at any cost. Now, that's who I am at base. I am peace at any cost. But after a while, it begins to get a little expensive. And see, more than most people, the alcoholic leads a double life. He is very much the actor. Now, if we remember that metaphor of the actor playing the director, to the outer world, he presents his stage character. This is the one he likes his fellows to see. He wants to enjoy a certain reputation, but in his heart, he knows he doesn't deserve it. And is that not similar to what many of what our family members, our loved ones are going through? Man, I'll tell you this. God bless my mom. She was so funny. There was when moms and they got the kids that are like kind of, I guess, college age, and they're like, kids, moms that knew each other when their kids were in school. It's like, oh, what's little Timmy up to? And it's like, and so my mom she told me this story. She ran into some people that were like, oh, and then, yeah, so-and-so's off at the University of Victoria. And then actually there was a gal down the street. I think she ended up in Harvard or Yale or something like that. Anywho, so what does my mom say that I'm doing? God bless her. She says, I'm volunteering with the homeless. Real in-depth volunteer. I was homeless at the time. Just like the double life, trying to present this stage character of like, everything's great, everything's wonderful. She's just really involved in the homeless. And I'm like behind a dumpster doing ladylike things, just living my life. Woo! But we want to, that same double life creates that same sense of shame. That same guilt, that same fear, that same darkness. And so let's go back to page 115. So it says 115, when you've carefully explained, barriers which have sprung up between you and your friends will disappear with the growth of sympathetic understanding. You will no longer be self-conscious or feel that you must apologize as though your husband were a weak character. So that shame that this person's weak. No, if we explain, hey, that this is an illness, and we explain the nature of the illness, that takes that shame away. It says he may be anything but that. And it's that idea of like, oh, alcoholics, they're just so weak. Now, bear with me, because if any of you, because I know you have, no, not you, you're lovely. But you know when you've been up all night drinking, you've had like 2 hours of sleep, you're hung, and I mean hung over. I don't mean hungover. I mean scraping yourself up, and you pull yourself together and you go to work and you are fighting it all day. You guys, some of you are like, I can taste it, like, ugh. We are not weak people. It is not about weakness. It is about being up against an illness over which I could not have any power. He may be anything of that, but that. Your new courage and good nature and lack of self-consciousness will do wonders for you. Socially. So that ability to, and that again, that kind of mirrors what we were talking about in the chapter Working with Others, where it's talking about, hey, if you want to go somewhere where there's drinking, make sure you're step 12, working with others, fit spiritual condition, all that stuff. But what we're talking about is like, when I'm not obsessed with me, I can show up and be present to you. And there's nothing better than being around people who are showing up and being present to those around them. There's nothing worse than like showing up like me, and I'm talking about me, when I show up riddled with insecurity, it's like all about needing constant reassurance. And am I okay? Am I okay? Am I okay? Am I okay? And it's never enough, and that's draining. But when we're able to not keep that secret, to get freedom from that shame, we're able to show up with that courage, that good nature, that lack of self-consciousness. That's attractive. And we're able to think of what we can do for others. So it says the same principle applies when dealing with the children. Unless they actually need protection from their father, it's best not to take any sides. The same principle applies in dealing with the children. Unless they actually need protection from their father, so if there's any sort of emotional abuse, physical abuse, anything like that, it's best not to take sides in any argument he has with them while drinking. Use your energies, because what we were doing before was trying to use our energy to fix, manage, control, to save, to all that. Use your energies to promote a better understanding all around. And it's that idea of like, it can be easy, or it can feel easy when we are if we're hanging out today, that's not us. But for those that don't have the glaring problem that is alcoholism, to try to show up with that moral superiority. And that's unfair for the kids in the sense of we don't want to triangulate them. Because even if their parent is an alcoholic, that's still their parent. And to, instead of taking sides, to be like, your parent is sick. Your parent has an illness. And, just trying to create that better understanding. And actually, while I'm on that subject, there's a fellowship. It's part of Al-Anon. It's called Alateen. And it's for, teenagers who are affected by alcoholism. And it's a beautiful, wonderful program. But then it says, then that terrible tension which grips the home of every problem drinker will be lessened. That tension. But I only hurt myself when I was drinking. But exactly, absolutely not. There is a palpable tension in the home that my illness created. And so again, when we look at this through the lens of how destructive the illness that is my alcoholism is, it points to the idea that do I not have a responsibility to show up to the home in a radically different way? Not just, of course I have to make those direct amends, but if I was bringing nothing but tension, do I not have a responsibility to bring safety, to bring peace, to bring understanding? And it says, so now again, we're kind of actually transitioning into the, having boundaries. Part of the, what? That's not in Two Wives. Yeah, there's some boundaries portion of the chapter. So it says, frequently you have felt obliged to tell your husband's employer and his friends he was sick, when as a matter of fact he was getting tight. So it's saying like, hey, if this chapter applies to you, you are probably somebody that lied and covered up for the alcoholic in your life. And it says, avoid answering these inquiries as much as you can. So don't get involved. Do not cover. Do not enable. Whenever possible, let your husband explain. Let the alcoholic face the consequences of their own actions, which is rude. I never want to have to deal with those. And how often, by the way, I'll just throw this out while my brain's on this little tangent. How often am I like thinking I'm being tested by God? I don't know if God actually gives tests. That's never really resonated with me. And a lot of the times those tests are actually the consequences of my own behavior. I'm like, I'm being tested by the parking ticket that I got as the result of parking illegally. How could this have happened? You know, God's testing me. Now, girl, it's just your consequences, you know. At least that's been my experience. Your desire so whenever possible, let your husband explain. Your desire to protect him should not cause you to lie to people when they have a right to know where he is and what he is doing. So we are not going to lie for others. We're not going to cover up for others. That's what it's saying. And it says, discuss this with him when he is sober and in good spirits. So again, we want to pick our moment and ask him what you should do if he places you in such a position again. But be careful not to be resentful about the last time he did so. So bear with me. What it's saying is the boss is calling home and is like, hey, Fred or whoever hasn't been showing up at work. And it's like, oh, he's got a bad case of influenza or he's got a bad case of whatever. We lie about it to cover. And we lie about it for a number of reasons because we don't want this person to get fired. We think we're being helpful. How often in sober living houses do people give their urine samples because they're being helpful? You know, like, do not enable. But what does this conversation look like? This conversation looks like setting boundaries. I'm not comfortable lying to your boss. So if your boss calls and you're drinking, what would you like me to do? Would you like me to say, I'll have him call you back? Like, how could I best handle this? That's what we're doing. We're setting the boundary of, I'm not going to lie about this. So if this situation happens, how would you like me to handle it? Again, I'm not going to pee in a cup for you. That's a really specific one. What would you like me to do the next time? Which is, you don't even need to do that. Just, I'm not going to do it. So it goes on to say, there is another paralyzing fear. And again, my alcoholism only affected me, but the home is in fear. You may be afraid your husband will lose his position, so get fired. You are thinking of the disgrace and hard times which will befall you and the children. This experience may come to you. So the alcoholic might get fired. You might struggle financially. This experience might come to you, or you may already have had it several times. Should it happen again, regard it in a different light. So if the alcoholic gets fired, if the alcoholic gets thrown in jail, if the alcoholic experiences consequences, let's see this in a radically different light. Maybe it will prove a blessing. And that is counterintuitive. But here's why. It may convince your husband he wants to stop drinking forever. How often did I need consequences to see that I couldn't do it my way? How often did I need consequences to see that I had a problem? So if the I was not somebody who was able to hold down a job, but how often is, I'm not an alcoholic, it's not that bad, at least I have a job. So the things that I lose are the things that might allow me to be able to see the reality of my predicament. So it might prove a blessing. And it says, and now you know that he can stop if he will. Time after time, this apparent calamity. Now, calamity is something bad that happens. Another way to say it or look at it is a calamity is trauma. Time after time, this apparent traumatic event has been a boon to us. A boon is a helpful thing. So how often has this traumatic event turned into a blessing? For it opened up a path which led to the discovery of God. And how often is that true in my own life? In my own life, a spiritual experience almost never begins with me getting what I want. It almost always begins with me coming to the end of myself. And me not, and that's where God enters, when I come to the end of myself. And so next week, as we continue on, what we're going to see is we're going to be diving in to a transition point. We're going to talk about why the Al-Anon or the codependent or those who are as bound to the alcoholic as is bound to alcohol, why it's so important for them to work the program themselves. But we're also going to transition to where the alcoholic is now sober. And what are the difficulties in living with a now newly recovered alcoholic? Now, when I say sober, I don't mean putting down the drink. I mean the alcoholic has worked these 12 steps as a way of life, like their life depends on it, because it does. And how do we navigate those challenges? So that's what we're going to pick up next week. So what I will do is I will stop the recording and all right.